But we're not live. We won't go live. I think what is it? May 28th is the date that I have planned. If somebody drops out, I'll move it up because I know your release is like what, May 1st?
Yeah, May 3rd, but with supply chains, like who knows? You
Oh,
know,
is that potentially an issue?
yeah, for every author, it has been. Yeah, we've all gotten emails that are like, just so you know, your actual release date might not be for a couple weeks after the announced release date. So I'm considering it like a release month. Kind of like when you're pregnant, if you're smart, you think of it as like a due month instead of a due date, just in case you go late.
I think we should talk about that on the show here in a moment.
Let's do.
I imagine, I know there's some other authors in that situation.
Yep.
I just rescheduled a bunch of these because they're all like, oh, sorry, at the last minute, our shipments got delayed.
There
I
you
haven't talked
go.
to anybody who had their books sunk to the bottom of the ocean. So that's,
That's
that's good. I know that happened to some folks.
oh my gosh, I can't imagine. That would be heartbreaking. Yeah, well, my point with that was just I'm super flexible. So slap me in wherever it needs to go. If it doesn't matter to me whether it's like right around release date or after. People will find it and find the book when they find it. So
I know that like there's so much emphasis on these release dates, and for like a practical reason. I understand when I talk to PR people why they do it. I understand, we got to pick a date and we got to get the earlier the sales, the better, especially if
yep.
they're considering doing another run, or if they're considering additional promotion and where
Yeah.
to prioritize it. So all that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like realistically, I'm finding books forever that came out a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and I love them today, right now.
Especially middle grade. Middle grade has this lasting power that other age categories don't always get. So yeah, I think it is all about the momentum around release date, but from my point of view, yeah, it's all flexible. So
It kind of makes, I don't know if it makes that much sense for when they do it for movies, but books, especially not.
yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
I'll buy an author's book if I know them or if I'm at their launch event. Because
Yep.
that's what I did this weekend. I went to the first launch event post pandemic where I was able to go in person
Oh,
and buy my friend's book and have him sign it and all that good stuff.
yeah.
And so like then I'll buy it right at the release date. But otherwise, if I know a book's out, if I have a hole in my schedule, now is the time. Or more often
Yep.
than not,
Yep.
I'm wherever my spot on the hold list from the library.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and yeah, a movie is over in 2 hours. You can watch any movie, even if you're not really in the mood for it. But a book, I feel like there's certain books for certain moods. And if the mood doesn't match up, it's not time for that book, even if I really want to read it. So yeah, but like you said, you understand from the PR point of view, you got to pick a date and you got to follow through with the marketing and create some momentum and then move on to the next book. So I understand, but it is enough to drive an author slightly nuts around release date with all of the stuff that happens. And then the weirdest is right after the radio silence. With every book that's come out, I've had to get used to that. Like the big push and all this excitement, and then the book comes out, and like 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, there's nothing. There's nothing else. Like there's just the book's out. We did all the things, and then am I forgotten? Is my book forgotten? Who knows?
I feel like this should be the start of the show because I think this is relevant to everybody that's launching right now.
That's great.
Because hi there, esteemed audience, lovely to have you.
Hello.
So 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after, when do you? Because this is your fourth launch, right?
This is my fourth launch. Yeah.
So when do you get some kind of confirmation that, hey, my book's out in the world and it's doing great, or I better hurry up and write that next book sooner than I expected?
So for me personally, actually around the time that I turn the book in for copy edits is when I naturally emotionally have removed myself from the world of the book. It's way before the book even comes out and even is being discussed. So and that's because I am a pretty prolific writer and I'm always working on the next thing. And so by the time the book's in copy edits, I've moved on. Like I've emotionally I can't make any more big changes, nor do I need to. So copy edits feel so nitpicky that I don't know, something in my brain is just like, you did it, you're done, you passed the finish line with that one, and it's just your job. Yeah, your job is done, move on to the next thing. So release time is always weird, like time traveling almost, because I have to like really think about, okay, I have to think about like the last time I really deeply cared about this book as its creator. And like, I have to remember what it felt like to work on it. So for me, that was like about a year ago when we turned it into copy edits. But as far as like, when do you get confirmation? I don't know. Do you ever? Maybe if you win a Newbery, then you're like, oh yeah, this book came out and people liked it. Done. Check. I mean, I still have
to replace that with the dread of, will my next book win another Newbery?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So one thing I've learned about publishing, well, I've learned a lot about publishing, but one thing that keeps coming up for me is that the goalposts are always moving, always. You know, you feel like, oh, as soon as I can get an agent, or as soon as I can get a first draft done, then I'll feel validated, or I'll feel like I'm succeeding, or I'm on my way. And then you cross that line, and then the next thing comes up that you're chasing, which is great. I mean, stagnation isn't, for me anyway, maybe for some people, but it does mean that you can constantly be chasing after some validation that is never really going to happen, because as soon as you cross that, then you're just looking ahead. Like you said, you win the Newbery, and then your next book, you're like, oh no, if this doesn't win the Newbery, then like, what does that mean? But you're very lucky if you win one Newbery in your life. So it's not really realistic to constantly need the same level of validation for every single project and every single book, because eventually, like, there's only so much you can optimize in your life, like, before you're like, okay, I think about this with like step counting. I used to like keep track of my steps every day, because I like numbers. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, one year I did like on average like 12,000 steps a day and felt pretty good, and was like, I could do more than that next year. And then it was like 15,000 steps a day, and then like 18,000 steps a day. And at what point do you go, okay, I can't keep raising the bar for myself every year, or else I'm going to be trying to do 50,000 steps every day, or else I'll feel like a failure. And I don't know, that is kind of how I see book releases, books in general. Just, what are you trying to optimize, and why? I can't even remember what the question originally was, but there's
me either. We're doing great. It's fine.
Okay, good. Good.
The good news is you're on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast.
That's
so
right.
This is the moment.
This is the ultimate validation. Yep. We can take the goalpost down.
Prior to this, when was the first time you felt like, oh, I am an author? It did happen for me. Was it the launch of that first book, or was it before that, after that?
Honestly, probably getting my agent. That would have been August of 2013. A year in which I spent a lot of time on the Middle Grade Ninja website, reading lots of blog posts, because like, I just loved reading stories of people who like people's publishing stories, and you posted a ton of them. And so I was on there a lot. But I got my agent, and it felt like a concrete thing I could tell people, like, hey, I took that first step. Like, and also it felt like the first time somebody else had said yes to me, somebody outside of just like my family telling me like, good job, you can do this. Yeah. So probably when I got my agent. But I think my threshold for validation is probably a lot lower than other people's. It doesn't take much for me.
Well, I know that when I got my agent, people go, that's great. What's a literary agent? So
oh yeah.
It didn't quite cross the line for me.
Oh yeah. But see, then you can like really play up what this means when you're explaining it to non-publishing people. Be like, see, this is the first step. Like, all it takes now is just a book deal. And then, which of course it's much more complex than that. But But yeah, that was the first time, like I said, somebody that I didn't know, a stranger who had no reason to say yes to me, just to stroke my ego, had said yes. And so that felt very validating.
And your agent is Victoria. How do you say her last name?
Marini. Yeah. So Victoria is my second agent. My first agent, we just grew. This shouldn't be so complicated to talk about. It's like this weird taboo, I feel like, among writers to not talk about leaving agents, but we just weren't that business compatible after all, which is hard to tell when you sign with an agent based on just what you know about them online and the first few phone calls. We were compatible at first, and then I wanted different things than I think she wanted for my career. And so in 2019, I said, I don't think we should work together anymore. I think this is frustrating for both of us. And so I found another agent. I found Victoria, who actually I almost signed with originally. Victoria was one of the agents who had offered representation on Bees back in 2013. And so I reached back out to her 6 years later and was like, you still interested in working with me? And she's forgiving. And so she said yes.
That had to be a huge thing, because in 2019, that's after the first 3 books, right?
Yeah, and actually after I had 6 books total under contract with Candlewick at that point. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge life.
Yeah.
Life change.
It was very anxiety inducing to have those conversations. I felt very guilty. I felt very convinced by her emails back saying like, no, maybe we can work this out. But like, I just had, yeah, it's a hard thing, but you know what? I know more writers who have left their first or even second agents than I know writers who have stayed with their original agent. It's not a marriage. It's a business partnership. And sometimes you just aren't compatible business-wise, and there might be somebody better to work with for you and your personality. That's it. Like, it doesn't have to be personal. It doesn't mean that you're a diva if you need to leave your agent. Like, it's not a marriage. I sometimes don't like the way that we talk about finding an agent as if you're locked down for life. I think that can be a very toxic mindset, but
Well, it's definitely very in favor of agents rather
sure.
than authors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to realize, like I had to realize like, oh, yeah, she works for me technically. Like I kind of hired her, even though when you're querying, it feels so much like the agents have all the power because they're the ones that, you know, you're waiting for them to say yes to you. But after that, I mean, it is a partnership, but also it's your work that they're submitting. And it was hard for my previous agent. It was really hard for me to maintain that kind of dynamic. I felt very much like she knew what she was doing and I should just agree with everything that she said for my career. And so I needed to find somebody who I could communicate with and have it feel more like a partnership. So I'm with Victoria Marini, and she's wonderful.
I think if I had a hole in my roof, I wouldn't send out letters to 20 different roofers and go, oh God, I hope this is the one. Please come fix my roof.
Isn't it a weird dynamic? It's so weird. And yet I understand why it functions the way it functions. There's a certain like gatekeeping. I think gatekeeping helps keep publishing fresh. I say with a question mark, like it's so controversial. I don't know.
Question mark, hoping you'll elaborate. Go on.
Well, as I was saying that, I also like realized that gatekeeping is also what keeps traditional publishing problematic and exclusionary and all of these terrible things that with writers of color and writers of marginalized backgrounds, like gatekeeping is very often what keeps them from having a fair shot in publishing as well. But I should say I spent like 9 months as an unpaid intern for a literary agent back in 2012 for Mary Cole, back when she was an agent in publishing. She's doing freelance editing now, but
previous guest, Mary Cole, who I think
yes,
was episode 3 or episode 5, very early.
Way back in the days.
Amazing, amazing now editor.
Yes.
I assume amazing agent, but you worked for her. You tell me.
Yeah. Oh, she was great. She was so great. In fact, there's so many books that came through her inbox that went on to sell either with Mary or with other agents that I still like. Monstrous by Marcy Kate Connolly. I got to read that in manuscript form and still just remember.
Also previous guest.
Yes.
So I'll stop plugging.
No, please plug away. Your roster is
catalog of Steve's audience. They're all there.
You do, exactly. But Mary hired me to basically look like to help take care of her inbox and among other things. And I remember being about to open her slush pile, like her inbox for the first time, and just thinking, okay, this is either going to be incredibly encouraging because I'm going to look and see that there's actually not that many amazing books waiting in here, and that I do have a shot at, getting an agent of my own someday, or it's going to be super discouraging because it's going to be 80 amazing manuscripts waiting in here. And I'm just going to realize like how the odds are absolutely out of my favor. And I opened her inbox and was like, oh, I feel like I could be published, because so many of the emails were like people who either were delusional and didn't understand publishing, like things like, I want to write the next Da Vinci Code and I want you to split the money with me. Like, that's not how publishing works. That's not what we're doing here.
Are you telling us Mary Cole didn't jump on that offer?
I know, what a shame. Or people who just were not there yet and needed like another few rounds of refiner's fire before they were ready. And I think I have a lot of thoughts about the different kind of branches that publishing has taken, especially with self-publishing and traditional and indie and all of these, and like hybrid and all of these. There's so many models and so many ways to get your books in front of audiences. And I love them all, and I have experience with a lot of them. But the gatekeeping aspect in traditional publishing, I think not only does it help weed out people who are writing the next Da Vinci Code and want to split the money 50-50, but it also teaches authors to like grow a thick skin. It really is like the refiner's fire that you need later, I think. Like if you're getting used to rejection first at the querying stage, and you learn how that feels in your body, and you practice it, then later when you're being rejected by readers who give you poor ratings, or just by like the radio silence of nobody really talking about your book online. I don't know. I feel like it's all connected. Like you have to learn how to live with rejection, and the querying process can help with that in a weird way.
And keep writing even though your heart's been repeatedly broken.
Yes. I mean, that's the job. Is like you keep going, you keep writing. How important is writing to you, even with all of these expectations maybe being crushed? And if you can stick around and keep writing, then you'll survive.
So I used to have this myth in my mind that there was a point you could reach where it would be like, oh, now I'm here. I am the author I always dreamed of being. Goodbye, anxiety. Goodbye, bad feelings. It's all happiness from here on out. And I'm continually learning by talking to the people I would expect that to be true for, that it isn't. I had can't stop plugging, but when I chatted with Catherine Patterson, just
Oh, yes.
amazing conversation, well worth listening. She revealed that when she finishes a book, she's always convinced this is the last one. It's terrible. They're all going to hate me now. It's all
Wow.
over. And I'm like, no, you're beloved. The dream came true, Catherine Patterson. Everything is great. And she disagrees. Fair
Yeah.
enough. So I don't think there is that plateau you reach where now I'm above it all. You just keep going. And even if you did reach that plateau in your professional life, there would be something in your personal life, or there's always something you've got to be juggling, I feel.
Yeah. There's no real finish line, really, which is a bummer, I guess. But also maybe it's not a race at all. So we should stop looking for a finish line. Maybe it's just a nice stroll and sometimes a jog, but yeah, the rejection never ends. There's no point, I don't think, where you reach golden author status and no longer hear the word no. It just doesn't happen.
We can now be revealed. That point is coming on this show, esteemed audience. Come on this show, and then everything is great for you.
That's true. That's true. I'm very excited to never ever hear no again in my writer life. Oh my gosh. I would be a monster.
I want to go back and we kind of hit the ground running. I want to talk a little bit more about your time as an intern for a literary agency. But first, I want to talk a bit about your journey as a writer, because when you're 12, you fill out a worksheet for school that your dream career is to be a writer, and your teacher tells you it's too unrealistic.
Yep. My guidance counselor said, no, pick something more realistic. So I wrote the next job that I wanted to have, which was I wanted to be in the WNFL, which I was certain was going to be a thing someday. He said, no, pick something else, something that's a real job. And so I wrote marine biologist because that was another obsession of mine. I feel like there's a group of writers, like I feel like children's writers, especially, there's so many of us that were into marine biology as kids. Anyway, side note, maybe that's like a poll that you can start taking unofficially.
It does come up surprisingly often just with the guests on the show.
Yeah. But yeah, it's and my family still knows that guidance counselor, and it was really fun years later to say, wait a minute, I thought being a writer as a career was unrealistic, and yet here I am. And he was very kind and was just like, I just wanted to make sure that you picked something where you would actually like be paid and have some stability, but good job. I always knew you would do it. Which is fair. I mean, that's like what a junior high counselor is supposed to do. I understand.
That's something now that I say if I teach a class or I give a presentation on writing, I point out that the average author income according to the Writers Guild survey of a year ago or 2 years ago was somewhere around $6,080.
Yep.
Even if you're away from the coast, you're living here in the heartland where the cost of living is much lower, you're not getting by on $6,080.
Oh yeah, it's and I was not prepared for, and this is like another thing that I always like to remind newer writers is how cyclical the money can be too. I mean, $6,000, then that may come in waves, and you may have 1 year, maybe a year when you sign your contract and get paid, that might be, I don't know, like a high 5-figure year for you. And then the next 2 years, you might be getting way, way less, like maybe only 4 figures if you're lucky. And I think I know plenty of writers who have had the same journey. Well, and me too, where you sort of quit the day job, or you say, I made it, I signed my contract, this is my career now. And then years later, after seeing how the money comes in these feast or famine weird cycles, because publishing pays out, at least traditional publishing pays out in these big chunks with a lot of time in between. So you really have to like budget, and it's always like robbing Peter to pay Paul and like catching up, and then you're out of money again. So many writers end up having to like go back to a day job or find another job after they've been publishing for a while, because they realize or they learn like, oh, it's actually incredibly unstable the way that you get paid. And that can feel like a huge failure. Like you can feel like a failure if you have to go back and find another source of income, even if you're still publishing or you have been publishing. But like the money thing for traditional publishing is so cyclical. And like, if one year you need an extra job to like pay your bills, that doesn't mean you're not a real writer anymore. And next year you might not need it or whatever. So it just, you have great years and you have not so great years. And unless you have like a trust fund or a very wealthy spouse or some other way to even things out, yeah, there might be some years where you're teaching piano lessons and there might be other years where you can just write full time, or maybe you are smart and keep your day job. I don't know, but it's very cyclical.
Now, of course, post-pandemic, mid-pandemic, wherever the heck we are in this thing, I know publishers are breaking up advance payments. That they broke them down to 4, and now I've hearing 5.
Yeah,
and that will probably be a trend that continues. Maybe not, but it seems that way, which might be useful for tax purposes. You'll pay a lower tax bill, maybe possibly overall. But you're talking, I think I read one example of a $25,000 advance paid out in 5 different installments over 4 years. Now, who's
that's a
living on that?
joke.
That's better than you know what, that's actually was worse than the $6,080 or whatever it is per year. Now, presumably you've got maybe some other books that are earning possibly some royalties coming in, possibly some speaking gigs now that hopefully folks are going to come out in person, or Zoom gigs or whatever.
Yeah,
It's still going to be kind of a hard scramble life for some authors, I would think.
yeah, absolutely it is. It's and I don't know what the answer is, but I just, it's weird to my family, especially like my parents and my siblings, for them to see how hard I work and know like how little the money actually is in comparison to how much you work. Like you can writing books, whether you have another day job or not, can easily take up 40 hours a week if you wanted to, you know, like if you have it takes a lot of work to write and edit books, and yet you don't always get paid for the equivalent of like a 40-hour work week. So it's weird. Yeah, it's I mean, I have a lot of emotional thoughts about the way that publishers pay out authors, and I don't know. I will be interested to see what happens. It seems like there's a reckoning coming of some sort. There's been a lot of conversations about the workload that editors have. There's been a lot of editors leaving the business recently because it's just too much work for too little pay. Good editors, amazing editors. So
with very high profile exits, which I applaud, because then we can all enjoy and finding out, oh, that's what was happening at that house. Oh, that's how they were treating this particular person. Now we all have that data to work for.
Exactly. So I don't know. My publisher is Candlewick Press, and they've always been so good to me. They're not splitting their advances into 5 parts as far as I know. They've always been very reasonable and had a pretty good work environment for their employees, as far as I know.
Well, Candlewick's a bit of a bigger press and very well established as opposed to some of these. I don't know what the term. I never want to say bad things, even if I know that a particular group has been scamming authors. Like, why did they? Who's telling that story? How are we interpreting the scam? Unless it's black and white, you were charging authors money that you knew they were never going to make back. I still like to extend this this thought that, oh, you were in books, so there was a goodness to you somewhere in there that went a little bit awry. I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah, that's how I feel too. Especially because I don't think anyone gets into publishing for the money. Include like authors, agents, editors, publicists, everybody. it's not like, if you are hoping to strike it rich, there's so many other places that you should go that will require less work and that will make you more money. So this is not you're better off buying a lottery ticket if you're hoping to become a millionaire off of publishing, unless you're in these higher ups in these bigger publishing companies. But that's every corporation. So yeah, it's an industry that runs on the labor of love, and that's great, but you can't feed your children with love for books.
But it's hard sometimes to distinguish what part of this is the problem of publishing and what part of it is just the problem of capitalism, period, where we pretend that if you worked harder, you'd be Leonardo DiCaprio, and you chose to be you without health insurance. You should have chosen DiCaprio, but you do.
Exactly. It's really frustrating. Well, and I feel like there's lots of harkening back to these sort of like more golden ages of publishing, like looking back at the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, when, you know, short story writers were being paid $1,000 or $2,000 for a short story, which is very like unheard of now. And so is it the publishing has just succumbed to capitalism's cold march, or is it, I don't know. I don't have the answer either. Wow, this is a cynical conversation, Rob.
We're gonna get to
the good stuff.
We're gonna talk brighter publishing things at some point. We'll talk The Patron Thief of Bread, available sometime in the month of May, or whenever you're listening to this esteemed audience, is probably available now. I did read a guide not that long ago, was Kurt Vonnegut giving advice to writers. Just anecdotal, and one of his first points of advice was try and sell a short story to get you enough money to cover living expenses for the next 2 or 3 years, so you can really focus on your novel.
Wow.
That's a lovely thought, Mr. Vonnegut. In all fairness, he was here in Indiana, lower cost of living, but still.
Sure, but still, wow, yeah, that feels like just a completely other time and place. Wow.
But there are plenty of bright spots in publishing still. Even now, I was just at a lovely launch for Marie Spratis, which I think he'll have been on before this episode airs, I think is how we worked it out. And he had a whole fashion parade at his signing, lots of kids dressed up and dancing, and he walked up to the stage with them. Everybody had an amazing time. It was a celebration of books and reading, and how glorious that was, and that's happening all the time. There's plenty of great stuff happening out there in the world. So I'm fascinated by this idea. You know, you want to be an author from at least age 12 because you wrote it down, but probably before then.
Yes.
And then when you have your daughter at age 22, that's when you get serious about publication. So what is it about age 22 with a daughter that changes the conversation for you?
Yeah. So actually, this is kind of like a poignant little story that I'm about to share. So all through my like publishing career, I've been telling the same story that like I'd been trying to like finish a novel, and I would only get like 3 chapters in over and over, like for years and years. And then finally I have my daughter at 22, and it finally, you know, makes me think, well, if I can push out a kid, I could push out a novel. Like I could do this. If I can give birth, I could do anything. A book can't be that hard. And I finally finished my first novel. Well, in the last couple of years, I went back and looked at those dates, and actually I finished my first novel before I even got pregnant. So I had mixed up these dates in my head for years and years. So I finished my first book about a year before I had my daughter, and which is kind of like, oh, cool. I did it just for my own reasons and not because I was like, oh, I'm a mother now, like time to get serious about all of these things that I've always wanted to do. So it was February of 2009, and the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest was ongoing. Do you remember this contest? That
vaguely remind the esteemed audience.
Yes. So basically, it was around the time that self-publishing was really getting up and going, and with Amazon entering as like a serious player there. But this was for a publishing contract with Penguin. So you would submit your novel to the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award contest. It would go through several rounds, and if you won, you would get this publishing contract with Penguin. And in the meantime, Amazon was, searching through all of the submissions to find people to like jointly self-publish through Amazon. But I just saw it. I didn't know how publishing worked. I just saw like, oh, enter this contest, potentially get published by Penguin. That's a publisher that I know of. So I heard the deadline was like 3 weeks away. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write a novel and enter it. So that's what I did. I just like butt in chair, hands on keyboard, just like threw up this novel that was not very good and submitted it. And it made it through the first round. And then the second round, the celebrity special author judges were Sue Grafton and Sue Monk Kidd. And they read through all the submissions and gave little like 1 paragraph feedback to all of us who did not make it to the next round. So Sue Monk Kidd gave me this paragraph of very lovely feedback. She complimented my author voice and my descriptions and my language. And Sue Grafton devastated me with her paragraph, her criticism. She like tore me apart. And it was, I mean, again, so warranted because it was not a great book. But then, I was like, well, I did it. I finished a novel. I could do it again. And I did have my daughter. And then basically like in those quiet, long stretches of like nursing my daughter and staring at an infant and just being like, what are we supposed to do? Like, we have a lot of time to fill up. I immediately started working on another book and just here I am. I still do that. Still just constantly working on the next book.
Good for you. I remember I had a baby on my chest and a video game controller just passed.
Oh, there was plenty of that too. There was plenty of that. Yeah.
No, I tease. I also had moments where I had him in a pouch and so I could type and get another book done.
Exactly. Yeah. And I should say too, like I was a single mom. I was terrified. I had no idea. Like I just was like, I guess this is my life now to do everything with a kid. So I better figure out how to do all this with a kid. So.
And you did.
And I did. Here I am. Yeah.
And so, okay. And then I had read that you had written Hour of Bees in 10 days.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
So what do those 10 days look like?
Getting up at about 6:30 because my oldest was up with the sun, and handwriting it in a notebook because that's like my preferred first draft method still is to handwrite it. So I would handwrite while she in like little 5 and 10 minute bursts throughout the day while she was playing, she was 3 at the time. It was June, so we went to the park and I would sit under this tree, and it sounds very idyllic when I explain it like that, but it was basically notebook in hand for 10 days straight. And she went to bed pretty early. She went to bed at like 7. And so I would type up what I had for the day and kind of expand it or just revisit it so that I was fresh for the next day. It was kind of like it wasn't quite a fugue state, but it was a very special insulated bubble of time in which the story just spilled out.
Would love to have a 10-day fugue state where I came to like, where am I? Oh my God, a book. How wonderful.
I have had fugue states like that since, but they have never been as fruitful as that ever. And that, I mean, the story, basically all of my revisions for Hour of the Bees were pretty minor. Like the main story didn't really change. And so it really was like a lightning bolt. That's so frustrating to say, and it's frustrating to hear, but I just know that I've never gotten that since, ever. Every book after that has been like pulling teeth. So the universe has balanced itself out.
Well, there's some of that positivity we promised. I mean, not the full teeth part, but you too, esteemed audience, if it could happen to Lindsay, perhaps one day you can be hit by that bolt of lightning and go into a fugue state for 10 days
That's right.
Compose an amazing novel that's going to come out and be a huge hit and lead to this sort of a successful publishing career.
Yeah. I'll say Hour of the Bees was started on the heels of a very devastating realization that the book I was working on before that, which turned out to later would become Race to the Bottom of the Sea, that was the book I was working on for years before I started Hour of the Bees, and I trunked it. I could not get it right. It was the book of my heart. It was everything that like 10-year-old Lindsay would want in a book. It was so special, and I just was not a good enough writer, and it was so frustrating. And literally the night before I started Hour of the Bees, I like gathered up all my papers, put all my files on my laptop away for Race to the Bottom of the Sea, and put it all away because I was like, I need a break from this. I need to start something new, because a writer, whether you succeed at a book or you fail at a book, you come to the end of a book and you need to start something new. So my goal with Hour of the Bees was just to get the taste of Race to the Bottom of the Sea out of my mouth, just to do something else, to succeed at starting something new. So it was fueled by spite, maybe, and by devastation, and by the desire to write something totally different, tonally, plot-wise, setting-wise, just to get away from this big, sad failure.
What was it, do you know, that was holding you back then, and that eventually allowed you to finish the Race to the Bottom of the Sea?
When I started Race to the Bottom of the Sea, I actually started that novel with a list. I wrote a list of everything that would be exciting for 10-year-old Lindsay to read in a book. And it was a very long list. And it included like sharks, candy, librarians, pirates, like all of these things that are in the book. But it was a much longer list. And the initial drafts of Race to the Bottom of the Sea were really more like 7 books in one. I'm not even kidding. They were very episodic, very like 7 plots. Like each chapter felt like, looking back now, I can look and see like, oh, that whole chapter is basically like the opening third of another novel. I just thought the answer was to just cram everything in. And so really those few years were me trying to smooth out all of these giant complex plots that I had smushed together, which just, I needed some space and time away to prune and find like the one true plot, which I was able to do years later when my editor said, okay, I bought 2 books from you. It's Hour of the Bees, and what's the other one? And I said, could it be Race to the Bottom of the Sea? Will you help me please get this book right? And I just like plucked and pruned and was like, why are all of these stories in here? There's like so many, I mean, and like the amount of characters that I cut from that book, easily like 15 characters, like so many characters. So I just basically tried to write like all of a series of unfortunate events in one novel. And then it was like, after writing Bees, after getting my editor, after leveling up as a writer, I was able to look at it and be like, oh, Lindsay, no. You get one plot, just pick one. And so I picked the one.
So, so the problem then was not something you could have fixed prior to the Hour of the Bees, because it involved you had to step away and then come back with a fresh perspective. There wasn't anything you could have done at that moment until later. Is that right?
No, and believe me, I was trying. I mean, that was like, I woke up, I thought about Race to the Bottom of the Sea. I worked on it all day. I just was too close to it. And I just needed more experience as a writer and as a reader too. I mean, I just needed to read more current middle grade books. And at that time, you know, the books that were being published, the books that were being acquired, and then have that perspective. Which
we blew past that for people who aren't used to dealing with publishing. Just to clarify, an editor bought 2 books for you, and then she doesn't know what the second book is.
Yes, yes, that's how it worked for me. So sometimes, an author will sell one book at a time, and there's lots of reasons for doing that. Some authors want to have a book completely finished before they sell it, which is smart in a lot of ways. Sometimes editors just want one book at a time. Maybe it's a publishing, their own publishing house, kind of their standard, or maybe they're not quite sure about taking on this author long term, and so they want to just offer, you know, a one book contract. There's lots of reasons, but very often you get these beautiful little 2-book deals, and it will often be for the one book that's finished, or at least, you know, hopefully usually there's like a partial or a proposal of some sort, but like the majority of the time it's finished and it's already gone through some sort of revision with the agent, and then they'll often buy a second unnamed project. It's a sort of second chance for the author to like, it's a 2-in-1. It's great, and it's the second chance for the publishing company to kind of put another book out by you and see what you can do. A lot of authors find it liberating to have that second book already under contract, and I feel like a lot of authors use that as an opportunity to do something really different and unexpected for a follow-up book, because like maybe switch genres, or because it's already under contract, and it's so it's fun to kind of take it as a wild card, I guess. That's what my editor and I ultimately decided to do with Race. It's so different from Hour of the Bees, and which I was very concerned about. I was like, oh no, this is not probably the ideal follow-up for Hour of the Bees, especially as Bees got some success right out of the gate. I was very concerned, like maybe I should be writing something that's more that's closer in tone or, you know, theme to Bees. And my editor said, oh no, let's put out something totally different so that they don't pigeonhole you. Let's just go for it, which was very wise of her, because nobody knows what to expect from me now, including myself. So it's great.
That sounds wonderfully freeing.
Yeah.
So, and something with Hour of the Bees, that one, the protagonist is a 12-year-old Mexican-American girl.
Yes.
Which, as we've been talking, I have carefully deduced that you are not 12 years old.
I am not 12 years old. That's correct.
You do not appear to be a Mexican-American
I am not. No.
So how do you write about someone whose experience is so much different than your own? Part of me hates asking that question, because you're an author. Of course you're writing about somebody whose experience is different than your own. We don't have a story. Sure. But when you're writing about somebody from a completely different background than your own, how do you make sure that you're honoring that background and representing that culture? And then also, how do you negotiate with publishers that though you don't have that background, you're going to be a person who wrote a book about someone with that background?
Yes, I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts, and I'm so glad that you asked this question, because I actually think it's really important, but I really need to take a drink. So let me take a drink while I gather my thoughts. Okay, up top, this is probably an unfair disclosure, but I just want to be like totally honest. If I were writing Hour of the Bees today, I would not write a Mexican-American character. I wrote that in 2013. I had very different thoughts and opinions and feelings about what I personally could and should be doing as a writer. Where I'm at now personally is, and again, this is personal. I'm not trying to like set out a mandate. I just want to say where I'm coming from so that other writers can maybe hear it and be like, oh, that's something that I could consider too, or that's something to think about. Until there are a decent amount of writers of color, as a white author, I feel right now, like personally, I will just be writing white protagonists until we have as many authors of color as there are characters of color, until the canon of authors of color is a little more fleshed out. That's where I feel that's what I'm going to do. And I will say my next book that comes out next year is a YA that was also originally about a Mexican-American family. And in revisions, the biggest thing that I changed in revisions was changed the characters to be white rather than Mexican American, even though I had done all the research. I had written the book many times over. So that's partly why that book is taking so long to come out. It was supposed to be out in 2019 because I had this reckoning where I just realized, like, oh, whatever I thought I was doing by writing a character of color, it's not actually how I want to be supporting authors of color. So I have changed my tune a little since I wrote Hour of the Bees. And I've had conversations with my editor too, where she said, I probably wouldn't acquire Hour of the Bees now because of your background and the character's background. I just have different thoughts about that. So it's okay.
Knowing that the book did go on to be a success.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and again, that's after a lot of, I'm not going to pretend like it was easy to like come to that conclusion or to make those changes for my upcoming book. And there were a lot of really painful conversations and reflections that I did with my editor, with my agent, with my writer friends, on my own. And so just it's okay to change. It's okay to change your mind. It's good to shift and pay attention to what's happening in publishing and listen to lots of voices. And it's also okay if you are a white writer who is going to continue to write protagonists of color. I'm not saying we should all stop this. I'm just letting people know where I'm coming from. At the time, writing Hour of the Bees, this was around the time when the We Need Diverse Books movement was really taking off, and was all over Twitter. And it was definitely something I was paying attention to and was very, I don't know, I have a lot of, I have a lot of questions for myself that are still unanswered. Like, why, what were you hoping to do? Did you think that you were helping by writing a character of color? Because I know that there are some people I think there's some writers who feel like they're offering some gift, or that they're being helpful to this inclusion movement by writing characters of color. Excuse me. And I know that that wasn't my intention, because I don't write with the aim to help anyone at all. So I wasn't thinking that I was being so benevolent by writing a character of color. Like, that wasn't my intention. I live in Utah, which is a very, very white state, but there's tons of diversity here, plenty of it. And I don't know. Again, I don't think I'm answering your question. So I did a lot of reading. I read a ton of magical realism, specifically because I knew that that was the sort of tone and like tradition that I wanted to draw on. Again, I would not make that choice today. I read a lot of forums about what it was like to be Mexican American, rather than reading upfront articles or like nonfiction books. And this was 2012, 2013, when it was a little safer to be like trolling forums for information like this. I read a lot of blogs. And then I had a lot of, you can call them sensitivity readers or authenticity readers or whatever you want to call them. I had a lot of Latinx readers read through the manuscript and point out anything that was racist. And there were plenty of little things that were in there that I hadn't realized were racist that were pulled out. And then Candlewick hired their own authenticity reader. And again, I feel good about the work that I did. I feel I'm not embarrassed by Hour of the Bees at all. I feel like I feel really proud of the representation that I created. Not representation, the depiction that I created of somebody with a very different background that I have. But I would just do it differently today. Does that answer your question?
Oh, and then some.
Okay, sorry, that was a big.
You're being so very open.
That was a big can of worms. Well, I just have, I don't know. I feel Hour of the Bees was a huge success, and it feels on one hand like, well, it would be really easy for me to just talk about, I don't know, to not share my reflections on its success and on its creation since then, because I've grown.
It's your baby though, right? You still look back. That's your debut novel. You still
I love that book.
Fond of it.
Love that book. So proud of it. Wouldn't change a thing. Like, just so proud. So proud. And this doesn't exonerate me. That's not why I'm saying the following thing, but I've heard very positive things and very positive feedback about what I wrote. And so that probably helps me feel a little better about it. I think it would be different if I had a lot of people in my inbox telling me this was problematic. But that's ultimately kind of what the conclusion I came to when I was making the decision about my next book, was that the representation and the depiction and the good job that you can do actually is irrelevant to me. It's more about, well, but who's writing it and who's being paid to write it. And that has very little to do with like whether or not your depiction is problematic or not. Like that's where I finally came. That's where I landed, was like, oh, I can be defensive about, but I'll do such a good job, and I'll make sure it's not racist, and I'll make sure I have all of these readers who give me the thumbs up, and I'll scour every word. But ultimately, if I go beyond just the book and just look at myself, where I'm coming from, my background and publishing, and look at the numbers and look and see like, okay, who else is here writing books? Is it still mostly white people? Okay, then, and this was hard. It was a really hard conclusion for me to come to. I did not like the idea of only writing white protagonists, because that's not the world I live in. That's not the world I like to think that I see around me. You know, it just felt very like, oh, really? But like, the world is full of so many amazing people, and it felt very limiting. But but if I combine writing white protagonists as a white author, and I'm saying white protagonists, I'm not saying all white characters, because there's plenty of room in every book to write characters of color, but it's very different to write the character who's the lens for your book as a character of color. That's very different. I don't remember where my sentence was going. Anyway, it's combining that with also buying books that are written by authors of color, making sure that when I'm on a panel, there's authors of color and it's not just all white people. Like those are things that I can do as somebody who's in this industry, just to make sure that like, okay, is this a nice inclusive shelf of like publishing? Are we all here? Are we all represented? So again, sorry, I just unloaded a whole big, huge,
amazing bit of content that where are we at in terms of getting diverse books out there, because we'd be there, and we're not yet. Nope, we're just not quite there yet. And as soon as we are, like, I'm sure I will change my thoughts again, because we're all works in progress, and we all hopefully take in what's going around us and change what we're doing. But definitely, I'm watching our time, and it's flown by. We have so many amazing things to talk about. We haven't talked about. I want to get back, and I want to talk a little bit about being an intern with Mary Cole at some point. But we're going to tease that now, because I definitely want to talk about the Patron Thief of Bread, which is available sometime in the month of May, depending on when you're listening to us. Esteemed audience, it's probably already available. You could be buying it right now while you're listening to us talk. And my promise is always to authors, I do not summarize other people's backgrounds, and I do not summarize other people's books. How painful for you to sit here and listen to me fumble through it. So what does a esteemed audience need to know about the Patron Thief of Bread?
So the Patron Thief of Bread is a big, fat middle grade book. It's very long. I'm so sorry, but I'm told it goes down easy. So is a middle grade book. It's my 4th middle grade, and it is about a group of pickpocket orphan thieves living in a sort of medieval France analog. It's not actually medieval France because medievalists online scare me, and they can be very yelly if you get details wrong. So I made an analog. And they decide to place their youngest member, who's this kind of quiet little girl named Duck, into an apprenticeship with the town baker. And the idea is that she will pass them bread and coin and steal whatever else from under the baker and give it right to this gang. But she's not expecting the baker, Griselda, to be this big-hearted, jolly, warm, understanding, kind of motherly figure. And so the book is really about Duck's sort of torn loyalties between this family that she's always known, the Crowns, this group, this gang, and the baker, who is ready to take Duck under her wing. And so about these two found families and sort of kind of like Oliver Twist vibes, I'll say. And then interspersed between Duck's story is the story of the gargoyle who lives on the roof of the unfinished cathedral in this town. And he is very grouchy. He hates the birds. He hates the other gargoyles because they're just big gossips. But he's very, very lonely. His cathedral will never be finished, which means he'll never be a proper gargoyle because he'll never be able to protect the people who come into the cathedral for sanctuary. And so Duck and the gargoyle, their stories intersect towards the end in a very sad but very heartwarming finale. And it's about bread, and it's about gargoyles, and it's, I don't know, it's a very cozy, comforting book, I hope. And it's definitely about found family, and it's definitely about choosing who you want to be, even if it's totally different than who you were yesterday.
And so who would you say is the ideal reader for this story?
A really bookish 12-year-old. Because again, it's a big book. It's long. It's over 100,000 words. Whoops. But yeah, a really bookish 12-year-old, somebody maybe who has loved Kelly Barnhill's work, somebody who has loved Christina Soon Tornvat's work, somebody who loves Jonathan Auxier's work. It has a real just like classic middle grade feel. She said so humbly.
The story opens with an Oliver Twist quote right there. Yeah. So I assume you want to put that Dickensian mindset up front.
Yep, definitely. I love me some Dickens. Although it's not Victorian, it's medieval, but the character dynamics definitely are Dickensian, she said humbly. Again. I'm hoping that feel comes across. Yeah.
Well, I wondered, I did a quick search for the medieval city of, is it Odiern?
It's made up. And
the only thing I came up was your book. I'm like, oh, okay, no, it's
it's made up. Well, yeah, funny thing about making up a bunch of French sounding cities is then the audiobook people call you and they're like, how do you pronounce these? And I'm like, I don't know, sound French.
The best you can. Have a good day.
Best you can. I don't know. You tell me.
So and obviously there's some magic involved. There's sentient gargoyles. This is not 100% accurate. But I could tell you've done quite a bit of research. How much research do you do, and how do you go about it to create this fictional world?
Oh, tons of research. And it's ongoing, and I love it. For this, I mean, books. I start with books. I usually I'll go to the library or I'll go online and just Google like medieval life and start there with like a nice boring kind of encyclopedia-esque type thing, and then go off from there. I found a few podcasts about medieval, like there was a podcast called, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically like this day in medieval history, and they pick whatever day it is. They just talk about events that happened on that day. And it could be really exciting things happening, like major wars starting or kings being killed, or it could be like, all of these goats got out of this pen in this one town and it was a disaster and they wrote about it. Medieval time period is cool and fascinating and not as polished as we like to think it is, I guess. I mean, we like to talk about it being really smelly and like gross, which it kind of was, but also people were not as pious and dutiful as I feel like they're depicted often. Like they're just people, like they're all, I don't know, running around, pranking each other, yelling at each other, going to church, not going to church, like just people. And I fall down rabbit holes and often will, like I learned about the hop fairs of Champagne County. Are there counties in France now? I'm not sure. The Champagne region. There were these hop fairs, which basically were just summertime fairs that would travel around in this region and kind of like farmers markets. So I read a ton about those and was like, oh, I have to put these in. And so they're in a chapter of Patron Thief. Same with learning about, I mean, obviously I watched A Knight's Tale a million times and included a night tournament, but it's not a real tournament. It's just like, it's like a scrimmage basically. So yeah, I mean, do I research the plot or do I research and find things to then shoehorn into the plot? I can't say. A little of both, probably. And that's how you end up with 100,000 word middle grade book.
When you sit down and you're about to embark on a new book, how much do you have? Do you have your beginning, middle, and end, some idea of that?
Yes, ideas come to me all at once. If I have the idea, the whole story's in my head, basically, beginning, middle, end. Yeah.
So you sit down and you write like a full outline. This is all the things that's going to happen, and then you expand it as you research.
Yeah. So I write my first draft without doing any research, because I find it. First of all, so far I haven't written anything that I don't at least have like cursory knowledge about. Like, if I had to sit down and write something about the Dust Bowl, I would have nothing. I'd be like, I got nothing. I have no story to tell here, but I can write convincingly about, pirates or Bigfoot or a medieval cathedral, because there was at least a little bit that I could start with. So I like to start with the first draft, just so I can get the story out and kind of see the shape of it. It feels more like a rendering, and it's really messy, and there's lots of placeholders, and there's lots of me talking to myself in the manuscript, because my rule is to just keep writing, even if I'm saying like, okay, I don't know where this is going, maybe I could do this. I write all of that down. Like I just, if I stop, then the anxiety catches up to me and I realize like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. This is terrible. But if I keep going, I don't know, it helps me. And so I finish with the first draft, and then that's when I read through and I outline it to see like what the heck I just wrote, to like look for the plot. And at that point, that's when I start researching. And I really love, I research. I go through the manuscript and write down everything that I need to research, big and small. And it's really fun to then go do the research and then come back in and plug all that stuff in, because some things are really big and you're like, oh, I need to research like medieval money systems. That's bigger than just like plugging it in. But other times it's like research, I need to know the name of this shoe. Like, what would they call just basic shoes, or whatever. And then I just write the question on a note card and it feels like secretary work when I'm in research mode then, because I have this stack of index cards that I'll have questions that I need to research, or I feel like I'm like studying for the SATs or something. Like it's just very left-brained, go through the cards, write the answers on the cards, and then on the next draft, I have my stack of cards there and I have my messy manuscript and I type it in. And when I come to something that I need to know, there's my cards, and they're usually in order too. And it's really nice to just like be like, oh, past me researched this so wonderfully. Like I'm my own assistant. And anyway, so I try to separate the story from the research as much as I can, because they just scratch different parts of my brain so much. And again, they affect each other so much that I actually, I try to keep them separated as much as I can until they ultimately consume each other and become, inseparable.
And you can't stop the momentum of drafting to go do research right then and just find out the one thing, because you'll spend an hour online looking at stuff.
Yep.
And the book won't get written, right?
Exactly. Well, and or I'll find other people who have done what I'm trying to do better. And it feels devastating. Or I definitely, it's all about keeping that ego happy. And that means like blinders on, pretend like what I'm writing is the best thing in the world right now.
So you need that illusion that you're the first person that's ever even attempted something like this.
Nobody's ever written a medieval middle grade ever but me. So original. Yeah.
So when do you start reading the market to see who else has done this and what can I learn from their successes and failures?
Pretty early on, because I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing that actually. And I don't feel very threatened by what other people have already written. In fact, right around the time that I was getting ready to turn this into copy edits, this should have come out in fall last year. And Candlewick said, actually, we have Kate DiCamillo coming out with a medieval middle grade in the fall. So maybe we should push yours back so that it doesn't get, overpowered by the Kate DiCamillo train, which is a massive one. And
There's
my editor,
maybe you can ride right behind her as she breaks.
Exactly.
And you get
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I thought about, there's a scene in the show New Girl when Nick is talking to Jess's dad, who's played by Rob Reiner, about his book that he's writing, this zombie novel. Z is for zombie. And he's talking about how there's a love triangle with the zombie and a werewolf and this girl. And the dad says, well, that sounds like Twilight. That sounds just like Twilight. And it's set in Seattle. And Nick pauses for a second, and you think he's going to say, like, dang it, like my book's already been written. But instead he says, well, whoever wrote that is really smart. And that's just like my take, is just like, oh, a medieval middle grade coming out about a girl and there's some goats. Well, whoever wrote that's really smart. So, part of the research too is finding other books tonally that match with what I'm trying to do. And that might be books that are medieval, but it also might be books that are not medieval. So, I read a lot of, I reread a bunch of Laura Amy Schlitz's books and reread all of Kelly Barnhill's books. Again, not necessarily medieval, but just hit the tone that I really wanted to hit for this book. So I do that pretty early on, somewhere around like the first drafting or the outlining, just so I know like my touchstones, so I know my influences and know what I'm going for.
Well, I predict that readers are going to be so excited about The Patron Thief of Bread that they're going to say, you know what, I want something that's similar. I guess I'll give that Kate DiCamillo a chance.
That would be great. That would be great.
Trial.
Yeah, I think that's fair. A nice little chaser for this. Yeah.
So we got to talk a little bit about the length. 100,000, over 100, 448 pages, a little over 100,000 words. Is that in the initial draft?
Yes.
The initial draft even longer?
Oh, the initial draft was even longer. It was like 130,000 words, I think, maybe at one point. I'm very lucky that Candlewick is sort of like, they don't have specific lengths that they cut their authors off. They're just like, whatever you think is right. However, I was informed that once we go over, I think like 480 pages, the price per book jumps up. The book's production becomes more expensive, and we lose things like pretty sheen on cover and nice pages, and like, because the cost has to be cut somewhere else. And we also lose, there's some schools and libraries that just won't order books that are that big. They just are like, nope, our students are too intimidated by that long of books. So my editor said, look, you can do what you want, we're behind you 100%, but here's what you might be trading off. So we did a lot of trimming. We did a lot of, and actually by the time we got through line edits, it was down around like 110,000. And then from then it was getting rid of a lot of the white space. The gargoyle chapters were much sparser looking, like each sentence was on its own blank, like on its own sentence, on its own line break, because I just wanted it to physically look very different from Duck's chapters. And obviously that like expanded the pages quite a bit. So getting rid of a lot of those page chapters helped shrink the book page wise down quite a bit. But yeah, it's a big fat book. My next book next year is a YA, and it's shorter than this, which is weird, but every book is just the length it needs to be.
I get frustrated when I read a book and I can tell that the ending is being rushed a bit because the author ran out of space.
Yes.
And just here, everything was resolved in a couple of chapters. I'm like, no, we were going at a nice pace. What happened?
I know. And vice versa. Books that feel like they've been expanded when they would have probably been very powerful if they had been shorter, but I think especially in middle grade, there's a lot of fretting about page count and book length, and because it can be very intimidating to a young reader to pick up a big fat book like this. But I think it's an investment for parents who want to plunk $20 down for a book that their kid's not going to finish in an hour. like when I buy my kids graphic novels and they're like, I'm done, I finished it. I'm like, we're still in the car. Don't tell me you're done with it. So this is like
$20. It should have lasted at least an hour.
No, yeah, or just like savor it. But anyway, and I was thinking a lot about Hugo by Brian Selznick.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, when that came out, I remember reading a pretty patronizing newspaper article actually about how librarians at schools couldn't keep it on the shelves because kids loved being able to say, I read this whole big, huge, fat book. Now, the reason why the article was so patronizing was because, I think the actual word count in that book is only like between 20 and 30,000 words. There's not a lot of actual words because that book is mostly pictures, but it's like an 800-page book. And these reluctant readers, as we call them, I guess, could carry around that big fat book so proud that they had finished it, because maybe they were used to just the little readers that they usually are able to do. So, and I feel like a similar thing is happening with graphic novels, that they're big books, and readers of all kind of levels can feel really proud that they've been able to finish a whole book. So I don't know, I guess I'm not particularly afraid of any page length as a writer, because I just know like it'll find its readers. I hope.
God bless the good folks at Candlewick Press for giving you the freedom and the luxury to be able to do that.
I know, I'm very lucky, and they're very passion project author first at Candlewick, which is why you get so many great weird books out of Candlewick.
Again, watching the time, and where did it go?
It did. You were right. It flies by.
We're talking about our favorite things, books and writing and publishing. And how often do you get to sit down and nobody looks at their phone and we get to talk about our favorite thing?
Very rarely. Too rare.
Have you ever seen a flying saucer, a ghost, and or Bigfoot?
Ooh, Bigfoot, huh? Well, I'm in Utah and go up in the mountains a lot, and it always feels like Bigfoot's just disappearing behind the trees. And I squint because I'm nearsighted, so everything looks like Bigfoot. I see Bigfoot all the time. Like, that must have been Bigfoot. A flying saucer. I've never seen a flying saucer. I don't think I've seen a UFO of any kind that made me like, whoa, that's definitely something eerie in the sky that I can't identify. But I have plenty of ghost stories, even though I don't believe in ghosts the way that they're presented. But I have good ghost stories. I have lots of good ghost stories. Do you want to? Am I teasing you? Would you like a good ghost story?
Okay, my mouth is watering. Don't tease me.
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to ask: have you read Ghostland by Colin something? Ghostland. Colin Dickey, maybe is his name.
I haven't, but I can.
Okay, highly recommend it because it's basically a nonfiction about American ghost culture. Kind of. He goes around to the most haunted places in America and kind of researches them and then presents his thoughts on them, which sounds, I guess that sounds kind of like pretentious, but it's so good. And if you like ghosts and ghost culture, you should read it. He talks about like things like why are ghosts almost always white, even in places, even like in the South, where you would think angry people who died who are coming back after a hard life, you would think maybe they wouldn't be white, but they're like almost always white. And why are ghosts always looking kind of like Victorian? Anyway, so he just like he asks questions like that I find like fascinating. So highly recommend that for you. It's an adult novel, not novel. It's an adult nonfiction. But my ghost story, here's my ghost story. My best ghost story. So when I was a senior in high school, I was a drama geek. I was super into theater, that whole thing. I like lived and breathed it every single day, all day. And because of that, me and a couple of my friends were tapped by this local contractor to put together a haunted house, like a Halloween haunted house spectacle, whatever, in the local historic hospital that had not been a hospital for a very long time. It was this abandoned hospital that everyone knew was haunted. I mean, it was on State Street in the town where I grew up, and it just was creepy and boarded up. He had bought it to restore it. And before he got on with the restoration, he thought it would be a really fun project to make it into like a haunted house for Halloween, especially because there were so many people in town who had been dying to like walk through this building. I mean, there was just so many good stories of creepy things happening there. And so we did that. We turned it into a haunted house, and we did some terrible things like hiding some brick walls that were falling down when OSHA came by to inspect it, that like it probably should not have been opened for a haunted house spectacle. We probably should not have had people walking through that. But the job that I took on was to do the historical research. I wanted to know everything about this hospital. And not only had it had originally been built as a hospital sometime in the 1860s or 1870s, and functioned as a hospital until the 1940s or 50s. Then it was a bank, a church, a music studio, lots of different things before it was ultimately like condemned and closed in the 80s. Lots of the things that I found, the research that I found, were about transients that had been living there, like houseless people who had like slept there and lived there. And I read some of the police reports that they had given when they were unfairly rounded up and arrested for sleeping there, because like it's gross to arrest people for sleeping somewhere where people
Our
need
sound
to sleep
is cut
somewhere.
out. Oh, there it is again.
Oh, okay. That was weird. Anyway, but like lots of them had stories of seeing figures, hearing voices, hearing little girls. So that was fun to read those police reports. And of course, there were lots of births and deaths. There was a particular legend of a deranged doctor hanging a nurse by the flagpole outside. But the coolest thing about this place was the crematorium was still downstairs in the basement, which was super creepy. And we included it in part of our thing. You had to exit through the basement. So, if you went through this haunted hospital, it ended with you having to go through this basement, past the crematorium, where my wildest friend volunteered to be inside the crematorium and pop out. I like had a hard time even being in the room with the crematorium. It was so creepy. But about a month before the haunted hospital opened for Halloween, we decided to drum up some like press and have the local ghost hunters come into the house, or into the hospital rather, and sort of do their thing. And so they brought tape recorders and they came in and walked through the house and asked questions and listened. And the ghosts said they didn't like me in particular, which was creepy. I don't believe a single lick of it. I don't at all, but that was their interpretation. And I was 17, and that was terrifying to hear, that the ghosts here did not like me. Like, because I was always trying to tidy things up. I was trying to keep things too clean, and they didn't like it.
But there was sharing if they said the ghosts love you, they want to follow you home.
I don't know. It was it was just weird. And then yeah, it cut out for a second, but I can hear you now. Okay. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Whatever that means. Okay. I think we're okay. So the ghost hunters had us each go into this back room, which was where the morgue was, one by one, and sort of stand there and just see what happened. And it was during the day. So when it was my turn, I went in there, and I still don't know exactly how to explain what I saw, but I saw all of the dust, like the sunlight was coming through this window into the corner of this room. We had all of this black plastic, almost like trash bag material, hanging from all the walls to make it really dark. And I like looked in the corner and saw all of the sunlight and like the dust motes like circulating and forming around like a figure, like when the sunlight and the dust stops on an edge of like a physical thing. And I just like saw something in the corner and immediately looked down and backed out of the room before I saw anything else. I was like, if I keep looking, this is going to make it so I never ever sleep again, I swear. So that's my ghost story. It's not the best ghost story, but I felt like after working at the haunted hospital, I felt like something followed me home, because I had a really hard time feeling alone in my room after that. I don't know how to extend. Anyway, that was a very creepy 3 months of my life where it felt like ghosts were constantly, and talk of ghosts and talk of haunting, just an everyday thing.
So you had that, and you mentioned you have some other ghost stories that we're not going to dive into now.
Yeah.
So all that, but you don't believe in ghosts after that?
I don't know what I believe. I don't believe in ghosts as like a Victorian woman walking up and down the stairs in the house where she lived type of thing. I think if there's ghosts, if there's some sort of overlap between whatever happens after we die, energy, whatever, cool. And I like ghost stories. I love ghost stories. I don't know if I believe in corporeal ghosts because I'm not afraid of them anymore. I was in high school, and I just am not afraid of them anymore. Now I can enjoy ghost stories because I don't worry that like a ghost is going to come sit on the edge of my bed.
Well, that remains to be seen.
I know. We'll see. I'll let you know what happens. Maybe I'll have a special visitor tonight. But I believe in ghost stories. I love them. I love them so much. And like, I don't discount anything. Flying saucers, Bigfoot, ghosts, stranger things have happened. And man, we just don't know everything. So I will not be surprised at all if ghosts are real, or if we tag Bigfoot someday, or if a flying saucer lands on my head. Like nothing will surprise me, because the world is strange and anything is possible.
You're the author of the Bigfoot Files, and as of this recording, you have not seen Bigfoot that you know of.
Not that I know of, but there's definitely been times where the mountains, the woods kind of go quiet, and you think, oh, the birds kind of stopped chirping. Maybe.
I saw an interview with a squatcher, and he had the best take on going squatching.
Yeah,
that's the correct verb for going to
that
look
is
for Bigfoot.
definitely.
He said, well, I hope we find them, but even if we don't, I'm out here, I'm having beer with my buddies, and we're camping, and it's a great time. Like, yes,
exactly.
good for you, sir.
That's exactly it. It's a whole, and that's just it. It's harmless fun, and it all centers around stories, and I just think nothing's better.
Well, the last thing I want to circle back to, and then we'll land this thing.
Yeah.
But you spent your time as a literary assistant to Mary Cole, and
Yeah.
so I wanted to talk a little bit about that experience. How do you land that job?
Well, you are on Twitter in 2011, and you're following Mary Cole, who says that she's looking for a remote unpaid intern to help her for 10 to 20 hours a week. And you are an aspiring author who's trying to learn more about publishing, and who is living with your parents while you are raising your child, and you are in a very privileged situation where you do have 10 to 20 hours a week to spare. And so you follow her application process, which was a resume and a cover letter, an email, basically, and you're selected. That was basically it. I did that for like, I think 7 or 8 months before this was at the end of her agenting career. So when she left agenting, I was done. Gotcha. But it was great. It was great. She had me going through and kind of writing statistics about what deals were coming out. Like, so I had Publishers Marketplace and would write what children's books were announced, what house, how much, what genre, that sort of, if it was a 2-book deal, just keeping Excel spreadsheets for her, that sort of thing. And it was really, I mean, I learned a ton.
So a reader reported that, like, she's requested a manuscript from somebody, and then you go through it and give her a report of what you thought of it. What kind of stuff are you providing?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, just a basic, almost like an edit letter, sort of like, oh, here are my thoughts on it, like whether I thought it was worth her investing her time or not. I think she just liked to have different opinions before she made an offer, because she would read them as well, and we would discuss.
Okay, so important point for everybody listening. This is not in place of her reading.
No.
Is requested. This is just in addition to.
No, this is in addition to, yes, to so that she can have a sounding board and see if there's some things that are snagging just for her personally, or if it seems to be like a universal thing. There were 2 or 3 other remote interns working for her. She hired like a few of us. So she would get her reader reports from all of us and read through.
Well, sure.
And that's
hire 20, hire 50.
Hire 50. I know, right? Isn't that funny? But it's not an unusual practice for agents to have assistants, hopefully not unpaid interns anymore, publishing. No. But assistants who read, like Victoria, my agent, has assistants, lets me know what their role is, and they read stuff that I send her too, because she's busy. She doesn't have time to read and reread and reread everything. So she passes stuff off to her assistant, which is great, you know.
Well, I like and respect Mary Cole, so I should emphasize that this is a wonderful practice. I'm assuming for you, because in exchange for those months of your time, you're getting an invaluable education that's going to help you to go on to publish your own novels, right?
Yep, exactly. And like I said, that first day in the slush pile, just getting an idea of what it looks like on the other side, seeing like, oh yeah, it's really easy to send a query that makes you look bonkers, so be careful. Or even reading manuscripts that are submitted and being considered for representation. They're still unpublished, they're very polished, but there's something about reading. It's the same reason why having a critique group can be really great. So you can read unpublished, unfinished meaning like it's not line edited and copy edited, but manuscripts. I mean, you just learn so much about what your own work is lacking or is doing really well by reading other people's manuscripts at that phase. So
you're reading that slush pile and it's not intimidating you. It's having the exact opposite effect that, oh, okay, even though there is undoubtedly this huge quantity of queries coming in, I'm still head and shoulders above the vast majority of these.
Yeah, and that sounds kind of snobbish. I guess what I mean too is I just was like,
well, I assume anyone who listens to this show is in the same position. We're all on a different level here at Middle Grade Ninja.
Good. I have no problem admitting I am a snob, but it was just it was very validating and very like, oh, I belong here. Yeah, I belong. I belong here. Yeah.
And then this has been tremendous. I appreciate how generous you've been with your time, and how open you've been with sharing details that I think benefit a lot of authors.
We hit some heavy topics, just off the ground.
You just kind of casually stumbled into them. I had questions that were much less in depth that we didn't even get to, and that's fine. I like this better.
It's great.
You're going to keep writing books. You'll come back.
I'll be around
the next one, and we'll keep going. For today, my last question for you is where I usually like to end the show is if you could go back to the start of your career, middle of your career, wherever it would be helpful to you, and give yourself some advice that would have made a difference for you then. It might make a difference for everyone watching or listening to us right now. What would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh man. I think two things. I think, first of all, on a practical level, I would advise myself to retreat from all the chit chat in publishing a lot more often. I don't love Twitter. That's not what I'm trying to say. I love the community that I have gotten over the years on Twitter. I've met some of my best writer friends through Twitter. And it really does feel like this water cooler place to hang out and see what's going on. And that can be very comforting, especially in a career where you are so isolated so often. But it is a tough habit to break, to feel like I constantly need to be connected or else I'm going to be forgotten about. And I think if I could go back and tell myself maybe around like 2018, go ahead and disconnect. Go ahead and let that happen, because first of all, the connections are not actually severed if you step back. The people who most people will be happy to still hear from you, or they'll see your books and still think about you. But also a lot of those connections are not actually connections in the first place. So just to step back and retreat into the writing more and make that the practice, to let that bubble happen. Like I think many of us writers daydream about, like a writer's shed or a writer getaway where like, oh, you can just leave everything behind and just like write and not focus on the world or publishing or who sold what book. Well, you can do that right now. You can do it right now. You can put down your device and you can choose to live and to write in a bubble. I mean, even like 2 hours a day. There's a great book by Jeff Tweedy, who's the lead singer and creator of the band Wilco. He wrote a book called How to Write One Song. It's so good. It's not just about songwriting. Highly recommend it. He talks about the disappearing. The disappearing, if you can practice disappearing into your work, that's like the most important thing to practice. So I wish I practiced that more, because now it's harder than ever, especially feeling like I constantly need to be connected to the news, and just like I wish that if I could go back, I would say, okay, yes, 2018, here's a good turning point for you to practice disappearing. Go ahead and disappear every day, even for just an hour or two. Disappear. But the other thing that I would validate, something that I have always known and always forget and have to remember that I already know, which is it's really just all about the books. It is. At the end of the day, it's all about the writing. And like, whenever I choose writing or choose books, I never regret it. And it's always the right answer. And look, we don't get into publishing for the paycheck. We don't get into publishing for the glory. If you do, you're going to be very disappointed, I think. I'm here for the stories and for the writing, and that is reason enough. And it's hard work, and it will always be more work than I will get credit for, which is hard. I'm a gold star generation kid. I want all the credit, but that's the wrong career if I need all the pats on the head for all the work that I've done. But none of that matters when I remember, oh, I'm here to write. I'm here for the writing, and the writing always saves me. And the writing, it's the end all be all. It's when in doubt, turn back to the writing. I would validate that every month of my career. I would just be like, yes, this is 2022 Lindsay here to tell you, yes, it's still true. It's still true.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Oh, Twitter. I'm on Twitter less than I used to be. I'm on Twitter. Yeah, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, and my website is lindsayeagarbooks.com. It's down this week, so if you look it up, it's gonna be down because I'm doing some much needed maintenance, but by the time this airs, it'll be up and running. So you can find me there. I post lots of pictures of my kids on Instagram because they're funny. And I mostly, I don't know, what do I do on Twitter? Mostly just go on and then go, oh yeah, I don't want to be here. And run away. But that's where you can find me.
As always, esteemed audience, if you check me on Twitter, I pity you. Once a week, I'll tweet something about a Batman movie or a video game, and then I post the link for the show, and that's about it. But at Middle Grade Ninja, or at MG Ninja on Twitter, if you're so inclined, download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will change your life. Check out thousands of interviews with authors, almost as wonderful a conversation as this one, available at middlegradeninja.com. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.